Right. Felicitations, malefactors. Welcome back to Random Pick, or Random People I Know. I'm your host, Sam Bradley, and this week we have Micah with us, and we're going to be talking about the relationship of critical thinking and faith, and it's going to be a really interesting topic. Micah, why don't you introduce yourself and give us why you wanted to talk about this specific topic?
Okay, for sure. Well, my name's Micah. I run a small YouTube channel. I haven't posted up there in a while, and I kind of, just kind of lurk in various communities online, mainly around like intellectual topics. So that's really why whenever I go online, it's always like intellectual stuff. So that's why I decided to pick this topic because I've kind of been mulling over it, and it seems kind of relevant to a lot of what you might call faith and extra faith discussions, like like discussions with people that are outside Christianity, as well as interfaith, discussions as to what the role of critical thinking is for people of faith and things of that sort. So I've been thinking about it a little bit. Didn't have I'm not really taking a position yet. I'm just kind of exploring what my peers would serve me well in that endeavor. So appreciate the opportunity to come on. So
Oh, excellent. I guess one question is kind of in a general sense, how would you define faith?
yeah, I mean that's a great question. Where lots of people define faith as the belief of something without evidence or the belief of something without proof. That's one way you can define faith. A simpler, more general way of defining faith is just confidence in something or person or a thing. Just confidence. I have faith in, Sam, that he's going to run this podcast well.
Hmm.
And then, you can think about that as like those two definitions are almost interrelated, because do I have proof that you're going to run the podcast well? I mean,
Hmm.
I didn't do any research. I don't know. I didn't even know what your podcast was called. So I haven't listened to any of the episodes or anything. So kind of showing my hand here as far as that's concerned. But but yeah. So when it comes down to faith, I like the first definition better. Just faith. Faith is in confidence in something. I think you can have good reasons to be confident in something, and that's why we put our faith in things. And then that kind of goes into the critical thinking piece. So
Sure. Yeah. I think that is a good way to look at it. Just the overall of, like you said, putting your faith in something that, I think it's something we do every day. Like, we just take things for granted and assume they will work out in certain ways. And I think, some people would, you could basically look at it as, well, based on an educated guess or based on how things have turned out in the past, it'll probably work out this way. So I think that's where the logic behind it can come from as well, kind of going into the critical thinking, I believe.
right, yeah. So basically, when I was thinking this through, Sam, I came out with three different possible theses. Right. So one is that faith is more important than critical thinking. The other is that critical thinking is more important than faith. And then the third one is that they're both equal and share a kind of symbiotic relationship with each other.
Okay.
And the thinking that I've done so far is that it's either number one, faith is more important than critical thinking, or it's number three, which is, faith and critical thinking are equal. I think if you get right down to it, you need to be able to have confidence in something before you're able to critically think at all. You need to be able to have confidence in your own ability to critical think, aka have faith in your own ability to critically think before you can, make propositions, and you know, you have to trust or have faith in your ability to make sense of the world. And you also have to believe that the world can be known, and that the world has a rational structure, right, that can be
Hmm.
apprehended by humans, and that we're capable of doing that. Those are all a priori assumptions that you need to take on in order for you to engage in the endeavor of critical thinking at all. So you need to have these sort of axioms at the bedrock, right? Or
Hmm.
presuppositions, or whatever you want to call them. And so
Right.
that's basically the case for why faith is more important. But if you think about it from a different way, you might say, well, don't you need your critical thinking lens to even come up with those presuppositions? You know?
Hmm.
So it might be closer to thesis three, which is, you know, the idea that they're both symbiotic and need to be together. So
True. I think that is a good stance to have on that. I think that makes sense. That you need to, in theory, in order to have faith, you have to be able to critically think. Or some people could look at it as like, well, faith is believing in something without having support. But I don't think that's like 100% true. Like, there is things that you could believe, but you could always argue, say, like, well, I have faith that I will wake up tomorrow. Technically, that could just not happen. Like, given you have a lot of like things that be like, well, the possibility is very high, but it's still not 100% certainty, sort of a thing. Kind of like going back to what I said of everyday occurrences or things we deal with every day, we, in theory, may take for granted. So I think that's kind of an interesting way to look at it, is that we're using faith maybe not on a religious sense, but on just kind of a day to day, like. Would you have anything, I guess, to add to that kind of, or to elaborate on what I'm trying to get at here?
yeah, so it seems to me that what you're saying is that there are instances in your everyday life that you just, like you said, take for granted, and you accept, okay, when I walk off into my car, or if I walk outside of my car, I'm not just going to start floating into space.
Hmm.
I'm not going to when I drive my car, I'm not just going to start levitating above the ground, you know? And we don't normally think of that as faith, but you know, it's more in line with the confidence thing rather than the belief without proof thing. One of the definitions I was looking at for critical thinking was having good reasons for your beliefs, right? And you could ask yourself, what makes a good reason? And it's like, well, that's a good question. Um, it kind of has something to do with logic, right? So, and I'm not very familiar with the formal logic that you would find in a textbook. I'm not very good at that.
Like what that
Uh,
definition, the definition of logic.
well, like I'm talking more about syllogisms, right? So like A
Okay.
is this, and then B is that, therefore
Mhm.
C, or something along those lines. Uh, I
Okay,
I've
sure.
yeah, I'd say I'm vastly like undereducated on that. I think there are answers to certain questions though that have to be religious in nature. And what I mean by that is it's like a circular logic, right? So you use reason to justify the reason why things make sense because they make sense to you. You see what I'm
Hmm.
saying? So like the only way you can like justify the reason why things make sense at all is by going outside the framework of logic. And the way you do that is what you say, well, God just made it that way. And that's an unsatisfying answer to some people, but essentially the religious answer is, well, God made us in his image and God created the world
Hmm.
in a rational way. that we could apprehend and knowledge and discover it. So because that's the only solution that seems to work for me. Because, well, why do things make sense? It's like,
Yeah, so I guess to reiterate what you were saying about understanding of like the world and how things work had to have been supplied from somewhere other than just our own like our own human reasoning or understanding, because I would say that, just not even in like a religious sense, but I would say that people are very easily confused or very easily persuaded by, well, one, other people, or just like random knowledge that seems to present itself. Um, so I think that's an interesting idea that our understanding was supplied um, by an outside force, basically. Okay, like the cognitive abilities that to actually reason and think things through and like recognize.
well, that's one way of putting it. And I just want to be clear that,
Okay,
like, God gave us the ability to make sense of things, right? God ordered the universe in such a way where you could make sense of things.
okay, sure. I didn't mean to imply that it was like, yeah, like I that like obviously we have the ability to learn things and to grow to understand things. So having, we have that ability, and I think that's pretty evident.
That's right, because we're made in His image, right? So that's the whole idea. Is that, like,
Hmm.
what I heard you saying was maybe God just downloaded information into our brains or something. That's not what I meant. So, but I would say that we're not a blank slate either, right? So I like, to your credit, the idea that there are parts of us that are just ingrained into us, like the idea that we have a nature, right? I think that's definitely true. And that could be, that has to do with the fact that we're made in the image of God as well. Breaking that down can be kind of complicated. Basically, we have an understanding of good and evil. We have um, we have like a
True.
conscience, which is a very mysterious thing. Um, we have curiosity. We have emotions. We all share a certain emotional framework. It's very similar. Um,
Hmm.
you know, um, we're capable of you know you know addictions, right? That's just part of our psychological makeup. Uh, yeah. So, and religion is a human universal as well. So we're all capable of some sort of religious. Not that we know exactly what we mean when we say religion, but we just kind of fudge that word around and say, yeah, we're all religious at some level of some kind. So, or
Hmm.
throughout human history, So, um, but yeah, so yeah, the reason why I'm stuck on faith versus critical thinking, it was just kind of an interesting question because, you know, when you're talking to people that are outside the faith, well, they immediately say critical thinking, like no questions asked. And then when you talk to a Christian or I haven't talked to many other faiths, but if you talked to a Christian, they would immediately say faith. And so there's this, well, you might call it disconnect, you might call it a paradigm shift based on, what you say is important, based on your allegiance to certain ideas. You know, there seems to be a framework difference between the answer to that question and your tendency to be allegiance to other belief systems. Um, But when I explained to them that faith is just the confidence in something, right? Then they're like, "Oh yeah, well I need faith in order to critically think at all." So it's not as though they can be unconvinced that faith is a necessary and critical element of people's lives. Uh, it's just they often overestimate the importance of critical thinking. So that's kind of where I'm at right now with it. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that is really neat. Um, I like the kind of that philosophical or theological like the reasoning. Like I think you mentioned earlier how like we generally have a sense of like right and wrong, and I think that to me specifically is like super interesting because uh a lot of things, obviously, when things in like the news or things that like our country's dealing with, when it comes down to like people are like this is right or wrong, you could ask the question, well, how do you know if that is right or wrong? Like what makes you what makes you feel that that is a right thing to do or a wrong thing to do? And that could go to, like morality and things like that, or it's like, well, what do you like how do you decide that this is good or bad without having an example of something that is truly good or truly bad? So, and I think that's just an interesting thing. That's like a whole conversation in and of itself. But just, I think morality is a very interesting topic, especially in this, where you applying it to this, where you're able to critically think or, evaluate how something is good or bad,
Hmm.
um, and then just kind of decide whether it's through, your own reasoning or like, well, I if you're religious, you can be like, well, you know, my religion says this is good and this is bad. So there you have like your template for what is good or bad. But in that, you still kind of have faith in those tenets, or even if you're not religious, like if you see someone get murdered, like a lot of times most people would say, well, that's a bad thing. So, you have to have some sort of reasoning as to why that's bad. So you still have like tenets that you apply to certain situations or things that you have to critically think about, and again have faith in that decision that you made of whether something is good or bad or not.
So a
I
couple of
guess.
things I
I don't
thought.
know. I might have just been rambling with that, but
Well, people ramble all the time, and sometimes people get things out of it. So, what I thought of as you were rambling is there's uh, there's a couple of different ways you can approach morality. So, like, you can say things like, and this is kind of becoming popular online, is the pragmatic, right? So, the
mm-hmm.
pragmatic is if it works, that means it's good. It's a form of knowledge, right? So, like, if a bridge is built a certain way that it actually works, then you know how to build a bridge. It's like how can I explain it? It's like there's if it works, then it's good. And if your society functions properly and it functions not just today but tomorrow, the next day, and forever, and the rules are actually iterable or they actually can be done, then that that's your basis for what you should do, right? Because you can't play a
Sure.
degenerating game. Yeah, obviously, because
Right.
if the game you play degenerates, then that's extinction or whatever. Um, and there's this other weird idea that I thought about that originates from, I mean, it's most common in the Judean Christian framework is that the law of God is written on our hearts. And like that's a kind of a peculiar thing because in Islam, the only thing you get is the law that, that 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 Muhammad got from from uh from Allah. And that's it. You don't know the law, right? So there's this kind of opening within
Mm-hmm.
Christianity to kind of give humans this opportunity to discover what the law really is, or what good and evil really is. And it's kind of wrapped up in the Adam and Eve story too, because the the good and evil represented by the knowledge, that tree of knowledge of good and evil, that casts them out of paradise. It's like, well, what does any of that mean? So, um, did they not know what good and evil was before then? If so, then why does God punish them? That's a weird question. I don't know. I don't know what that means,
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
but what I was trying to get at with the law on our hearts thing was it it opens the door to a lot more, like you said, the critical thinking about what's right and wrong really is, um, as opposed to just depending on the
Okay.
tenets of
Sure.
the tradition to tell you what right and wrong is. So,
Mm-hmm.
but
I guess.
what were you gonna say?
Well, uh, I was just gonna go to a different question. So if you had
I
something
don't
else
think
you wanted to
so.
add,
I don't
go ahead.
think. I think that's wrapping up. But
Okay. So I guess one thing that to kind of maybe leading into kind of a wrap up here, but how has I guess faith specifically, how has that had
oh,
an
sure,
impact in
yeah.
your life specifically?
Well, over the years, you can wrestle with the big questions of faith, whether or not God is real, whether or not, and what does it mean for God to be real? Um, and then you can wrestle with things like how to act properly in your life, and so a lot of things you just don't really know. A lot of things, they seem to be outside of your grasp. Um, But then when you examine your own nature, you examine how you actually behave and how you actually act and what thoughts you'll commonly think to yourself, you'll find yourself saying things like, "Oh my God," or you'll find yourself praying when you're in trouble. I mean, these are obviously circumstances that happen to almost everybody. And you can say to yourself, "Well, I don't actually mean anything when I say, 'Oh my God.' And I don't actually mean anything when I pray when I'm in trouble." But I think you're ultimately lying to yourself if you don't if you don't give that credit what the credit is due. So I how faith's affected me, like the most recent kind of frontier is realizing that no matter what I do, I'm going to be I should be calling myself religious, right? Because if I tell myself, well, I'm not religious when I'm not in trouble, like that doesn't make any sense. I'm pointing to the fact that I pray when I'm in trouble and I don't pray when
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in trouble. That does like it's almost as if like the suffering like reveals the greater truth, right? Suffering reveals what you really believe. Um, and so deep down, I really do believe that God exists.
Yeah. Well, that was about usually try to keep these to about 20 or 30 minutes, and we've hit about that time. But I think that that was a very interesting topic. I really enjoyed kind of talking about that. Again, I enjoy talking about like that kind of like talking through things of how like both like you with like faith and logic and um, critical thinking and how those can be applied to like everyday things. I think some people would think that religious stuff or that sort of topics, that's not like something you have like a public conversation about, or it's not like a conversation you can have in like a civil or you know thought provoking way. And I think that's just untrue. I think all of those types of topics, those hard questions, are really interesting to talk about, just in general. But uh, yeah, any last thoughts before we sign off here?
Yeah, I mean, if people want to watch some of my stuff on YouTube, they can. It's just my name, Micah. And there's a picture of me. You should recognize. Well, you probably won't recognize me because this is audio, but um, I'm wearing like a red shirt. I've probably got like 50 videos or something. But
Nice.
yeah, it's been a while since I've been on there, so don't expect don't I mean you can comment. I might respond to your comment, but don't expect any uploads anytime soon, okay? So
All right. Well, if you shoot me a link to that, I can put it in the description, so that
sure.
people can find you easier that way. Are there other platforms that you're on that people might be able to find you on if you so choose to have them find you on them?
No, I'm only on YouTube, so
Okay. Well, that is fantastic. Yeah, thank you for coming on the show. I hope it was an enjoyable experience.
yeah, no, I love fleshing out thoughts that maybe I'm a little narcissistic in that way, but I love hearing myself talk, so uh
Hey, that's fine. Um, But, well, once again, thank you for coming on the show. For those of you listening at home, if you happen to be watching this on YouTube, check out Micah's channel. There'll be a link in the description. And also, please like and subscribe to this channel. And we will catch you next time on Random Pick. Thank you.